Welcome to the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. I'm glad you can join us. Even if it's by Zoom, a virtual festival, it's still great cinema, and we are able to get together this way. And we still get to talk to a lot of the filmmakers involved in the films we see this year. And that is no exception right now. We get to talk to the director of the film you just saw. We were practicing. I'm going to ask you to say it again
Sure.
for me.
No problem. The film's called WOCHIIGII, End of the Piece.
WOCHIIGII, End
Yeah.
of the Piece. Yeah, actually, I'm going to start that again if that's all right.
No problem.
Right.
No problem.
Welcome to the Kingston Canadian Film Festival. My name is Tom Ernst. So glad you can join us. Even if it's just virtually, it's still great film and still a great way to see it. And sooner than you think, we'll be watching these on the big screen together. Right now, we get to talk to the filmmaker of the movie you just saw. And I'm going to pronounce this very carefully because I do want to get it right, but I know that we got the filmmaker here, Heather, to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's WOCHIIGII, the End of Piece. It's the End of Piece that I got stuck on.
Yeah.
Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. What's interesting about that name is it was given to me by the community I was working with from Shirley Acco, and different people, different parts of the river they live on have different meanings for it. But the direct translation is WOCHIIGII, which means End of the Peace River.
It really is an easy word to say, and I think it's the anticipation of saying it and that you're going to get it in correctly, but it is a beautiful WOCHIIGII, and I think I'll be saying it in my sleep now. It's an important film that you made, and you also made it so that it's also an entertaining film. Now, I think I'm just going to jump right into this because I think it might be obvious to some people watching that there is a correlation to what we are watching on screen to what is just recently happened a few weeks ago in Ottawa, but very different. So I want to talk about without dredging up your own personal political beliefs on it, just the idea of the right to demonstrate, how to demonstrate, and perhaps maybe if you do see a difference, the difference in the two demonstrations that we're witnessing.
Sure. I mean, the commentary is really simple. In this case, the protests were stopped by the BC. So BC Hydro is a Crown corporation, and they did a slap suit on the citizens that were protesting. So it's an open slap suit, which means anybody who wants to protest peacefully can be sued for $420 million. So this is a government suing its own citizens for the right to peaceful protest. So I think what you're seeing is a difference between what's allowed and what's not. And a general comment would be that Indigenous protest is often met with a larger resistance, more violence, more arrests, less understanding.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, even if you follow Twitter whatsoever, this is coming up. You see Indigenous tweets saying, if we had this much support for what's going on with water and other issues. I think the dichotomy is huge, personally, but I do think that some might look at this and see a connection. Perhaps there is none. I do want to also talk about the visuals that you captured and that opening sequence. After you gave us a little bit of the history of Peace River, we have this beautiful zoom over the Peace River. And don't the trees or the sand or whatever that look like blood on the banks? And I wonder if you thought that when you saw that.
I think part of the choice was to give some more saturation to the images, just because you needed to feel the reverence and beauty of the nature. So I certainly had high saturation for nature, and I had a lower saturation for the news, just to make that comparison really clear. So it almost looks like you're walking into a painting, that first shot of the valley. After I've talked about it, then you walk into that scene, and that was the purpose of that.
You know, the story is essential, and you were with it for a long time. When did it first come into your lap, as it were?
So interestingly, there's a a very talented poet and writer from the Peace River area. Her name's Helen Knott. And I had ended up working with her on some poetry videos, and she was reaching out on Facebook talking about what was happening to the people in the area and that nobody was listening. And that was about Site C, and she was one of the forerunning protesters of it. And I just messaged her naively. I was like, well, we could just make a documentary about it, and then people would know about it. And I mean, that was my first, I felt like I wanted to tell that story with her. She did not finish the project just due to her own reasons. But that was my first awareness of it, was through poetry and her.
Yeah, the film is very poetic, so that seems to be where that essence of that began, or the seed of that began. You mentioned that your partner in this dropped out. How did that change the direction of the film, if at all?
Well, I'm sure that it would have been a very different film if we had done it together. Basically, there's two nations that that are in the Supreme Court that I'm talking about, which is Prophet River and West Moberly. So she's from Prophet River, which is further up north, and I don't really focus on that community very much. So I think that probably would have been a big difference. And then just who I was able to build friendships and connections with probably changed. And so Diane Abel, who's the main character of the film, is who I ended up, working with throughout the whole process after we met. So I'm sure it would have been a very different film, maybe more youthful because she's younger. I don't know.
I don't know how much younger she could possibly be and still make a film, but watching the film, the cynical side of me, when the non-Indigenous people started to join, and the cynical side of me said, sure, because it affects you now. What about support, non-Indigenous support, did you get that weren't directly affected by the dam building?
Yeah, well, I'm sure, like, when you see the paddle for the peace, I mean, I'm there a little late into the fight when I started filming there. So, I mean, the years prior, it was huge. And it was all over British Columbia. So I think there's a lot of environmentalists, scientists, economists, people that are involved. But yeah, I think that what's captured in the story is a good thing you're commenting on, is like a sort of grassroots reconciliation between farmers, ranchers, First Nations. And it's always, I mean, sometimes it happens, you don't understand what the fight's like till it comes to you. So certainly there's a little bit of irony when they're fighting for the land that is their land, sort of. It's meta, I guess.
Yeah. Meta is a very good word for it. I remember a film years ago, and I'm thinking it might have been in the mid 80s, and it was called Narmada, A Valley Rising, by Ali Kazemi. I don't know. Do you know the film?
No, it sounds interesting though.
Well, I'm not inviting you, but it was also about in India about the dam that was going to flood out an entire.
Okay.
But I asked that because of the similarities in this. Now that's across the ocean, and obviously there is no connection. But I mean, these things happen. Do these protests, do these fights against these big corporations ever turn out well for the people without the money?
That's a good question. I mean, certainly if you look at all the Indigenous nations affected that I show at the end of the film, I would say no. And you're right, there are similarities, because it's usually against a crown corporation or a government, and it's usually people who've lived there for thousands of years on the river and fighting to maintain their way of life. And I mean, we have, I think, globally, this idea of progress and being the best thing for us. But I think maybe there's some pushback now. Even I think people are trying to learn and understand a little bit more about having a more spiritual connections to the land and the places they're from, which is how, especially in this story that I made with them, their very essence of who they are and spiritually is connected to the land. But I mean, if you look back at Canadian law or things that have happened here, generally it's best to flood first and pay later. So I mean,
Mhm.
that's the precedent set by law. But right now we're also at a time when the treaties are coming up before Supreme Court. So if you think about it, it's like in Canada, they're just fighting for their right to exist, and they have to go to the Supreme Court to do that, which is a crazy thing to think about. And when we're talking about reconciliation, so much in Canada right now. But I would say that, I mean, I made this film with, hope that people would listen to the story, donate to the legal costs. But as Roland Wilson, the chief in the film, says, we're not going to lose this because we're not right. We're going to lose because we run out of money.
Mhm.
And but there are some cases that have been really successful. Even in my own nation, the Haida Nation was successful negotiating new ways of dealing with the government. It's a co-ruling between the Haida and the BC government. And then the Blueberry River Nation also won a case against a violation of the treaty in the same Fort St. John area. And also they were able to, BC Hydro had to release their documents to them for the court case. So that's one of the biggest things I talk about in the film, is the extreme secrecy that BC Hydro went about with. So, I mean, I am cynical. I mean, there's no evidence that Canada wants to hold First Nations, as priority. Even John Horgan in the film says, I'm not the first politician to disappoint First Nations. Like, what a bold and irresponsible thing to say, but sorry.
No,
I mean, it doesn't
absolutely.
seem, and that's what I think, it was a 5-year process of documentation, but it's documented that this is what happens in Canada. It's documented, a cultural genocide. It's all documented. You can't say it didn't happen now, at least.
Yeah. That won't, you do know that doesn't stop people from saying it didn't happen.
Yeah,
Regardless, evidence is evidence. And I think we see this in your film. I mean, we talk about money, but we talk about the secrecy, but the secrecy and the money isn't the most frustrating part for me watching the film. It's the refusal to look at fact, the refusal to look at science, the refusal to look at studies. I mean, at one point you have a politician, like the premier of BC at the time, say, I think the companies know more than the academics. These are words that came out of her mouth without any sense of irony.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where my frustration came from. What making the film, where were your frustrations? I'm all over the place, I'm sure.
I think I've certainly, as a storyteller, one of the frustrations was not being able to hear from that side at all. BC Hydro was like an iron clamp. It was just like, does anybody want to tell me how they feel? Try to talk to Christy Clark or John Horgan or anybody. I didn't get a or to the Bennett's family as well. I just didn't get a response. It was all a no. So I mean, that's why there's such archival clips, because I had to pull their opinions from their own public appearances just to talk about it. So that was frustrating. And yeah, I think understanding that it's just a lot, sometimes things happen just for people's political agendas. And it seems strange that, politicians that's not even in power anymore still has this dam that's affecting so many people's lives. She's not even in power anymore. So why are you building it?
Well, exactly. And but what she said was very telling in the memorial, when she said, and she corrected herself, but she said she's going to see the project finished, and then corrected herself, saying she's going to see to the point of no return. And that wonderful shot. And I'm so glad you were able to include those children in the shot, because I mean, they do speak to the future, and overlooking the work done on the dam. And you realize that she's achieved her goal. It's beyond the point of return, it seems.
Yeah.
What are the what's left open then for the community?
I think it still, like, the dam still has not found a geotechnical, like a safe place to put the dam into the banks. So I mean, in some respects you could say, like, Mother Nature herself is saying no. But I think what's left is to think about yourself as in a few ways. As a BC citizen, I mean, these costs are going to affect you if you don't care about First Nations rights or like sustainable farming, and you want to, rely, especially after what just happened with the truckers and COVID. If you think that you can just rely on food coming from everywhere else, then just go to the fact that it's going to cost you money. As a BC citizen, your hydro bill is going to go up because somebody has to pay for this.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you want to think of yourself just as a Canadian citizen, when you're thinking about the Constitution of Canada applying to yourself in your, the highest form of law, when the treaties enshrined in the Constitution in the 80s, if that can be violated, then I mean, we are all on a slippery slope, because if you can pay me to violate my rights, then why do I have a constitution? Why do we have a treaty? So, I mean, if this bothers you, there's ways that you can contact the government. You can write them, you can protest yourself. I mean, this story is so big to me, not just because I care about Diane and her family and the community, and as an Indigenous woman myself, caring about our rights. It's it's the whole nation. It's our treaty, in a sense that if it's violated, our Constitution is in trouble.
I find this again and again talking to documentary filmmakers, that the effort you put into making a film doesn't begin or end when the film is done. There seems to be a calling that goes well beyond this. And it sounds like, talking to you, that calling is just screaming in your ears still, and pushing you forward.
Yeah, you have to, I mean, when you are reading something or see something and it catches your attention because you're like, it's not right. That doesn't feel right. Sometimes you just have to follow that voice, because that's the passion that'll drive you to complete a project that, sometimes a documentary is really fast and sometimes it's not.
Thank you so much. You made a very important film, and a very moving and gripping story in the process of making that film. So thank you, Heather Hatch. I hope to meet again and look forward to your next project.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.